We're going to get started on our Bible study, Wednesday night Bible study. And this is actually part 2 of the Bible study that we started on last week on witnessing Yisrael. On part 1, we were talked about religion, we were talking about Christianity, and the purpose of these 2 Bible studies is really to take religion out. You have to take something out of people before you try to put the truth in them. So these 2 weeks of Bible study was really designed at giving you information that will allow you to be effectively witness to individuals and to deal with some of the questions or some of the rebuttals that they'll have regarding, the information that you're giving them. So this is part 2 of the Bible study on Israel. We're going to review a little bit about what we went over on last week. No part of this publication may be reproduced or retransmitted without the express written consent of Beyth-el Temple, Inc. of Chicago, which is under the leadership of our Chief Apostle, Dr. Yehochanan B. Aman. The information that you're about to be presented is not independent of Beyth-el Temple, Inc. of Chicago or Dr. Aman, who, through revelation or research, which includes biblical hermeneutics, has discovered the ancient biblical principles that were once kept by the prophets of old and later by Christ in the New Testament. These same principles were taught to the disciples by the Messiah, who then commanded them to go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. Our Bible studies are set up in 2 different parts. Part 1 is lecture. All participants are muted. Part 2 is our question and answer session. When we get to the end, we ask that you hit *6 on your keypad or *6 on your phone. And we definitely would like to hear any questions, comments that you may have regarding the Bible study, some things that we may not have made clear. We will address those issues at that time. So we want to start off. I believe we have 4 objectives on tonight. Our first objective, what we want to do is to show that El established a name for his people which will remain forever. It's kind of something we've been talking about through a number of our Bible studies, but we just want to touch briefly on that. We want to show that this family name is higher than any other name given to man. We're going to show the phrase, and this is what we really want to focus on, Elder. We want to show the phrase Gentiles saved by grace and spiritual Israel, that it's not a biblical phrase. And lastly, we want to show these 2 descriptions will not allow you to partake in the promises of El, thus cutting you off from the Father. So, Elder, one of the things that we kind of discussed and we started to go in on last week is being cut off. We talked about, we actually ended talking about the people of the children of Yisrael and that name. But before we move on, can we just talk briefly about these last 2 objectives? This phrase, Gentiles saved by grace and spiritual Israel. We know that a lot of people in Christianity may use 1 or 2 of these phrases. And so in relationship to our topic, why is it important that we understand how to deal with this phrase, Gentiles saved by grace and spiritual Israel?
Well, it's very important. When we think about what people will say when you're witnessing to them, they will give you the statement that I am a Gentile saved by grace. And we've gone over it in many occasions, where in Ephesians, the 2nd chapter, verses 11 through 13 and 19, where the Bible indicates that as a Gentile, you don't have El, you don't have Christ, and essentially you don't have hope. So technically, the Bible does not use that phrase, Gentiles saved by grace, and therefore we should not use it to describe ourselves as a people. We've also gone over lessons that showed you exactly what the name is that El wishes for us to call ourselves. It's a name that came from him, his personal name that he gave for his people. So when you run into individuals, you can basically explain that information to them. And it would not be wise to say, show me, because it's not there. But you need to tell them, if you're going to make a statement like that, you need to support it with what the Bible says. The same thing is true for the phrase that many of them use. They say, I'm spiritual Israel. And there is no such thing as a phrase written that way in the Bible that would define his people as spiritual Israel. And as we go through, we'll see that the Bible requires you to do some things that's not necessarily spiritual. These are works, or these are things that he requires you to do. So you can't get by with just saying I'm spiritual Israel. And when we do those things and we show people that, then we can help them to stop using such phrases and be called by the name that El wishes us to be called by.
Okay. So these are our four objectives, and we want to kind of talk a lot about it. We only have about 8 or 9 particular slides. Again, this is a learning process. It's something that we don't want to go into like just a ton of information, but we want to give you enough information, enough Bible verses, excuse me, to go out and be able to witness when those individuals say, I'm a Gentile saved by grace, or I'm spiritual Israel. Before El had a people who he claimed to be his own, the Bible tells us that he created man in his image and his likeness. Beginning with Jacob, El placed upon him a blessed or saving name that would be carried by all those that loved him and obeyed all of his commandments according to his will. This name was known as Yisrael. Prior to this time, there was not a landmass or a people that carried this name, for this is a divine name. Elder, I think that's important that we talk about that for a minute. People assume that when El created the heavens and the earth and he created man, that there was a people here that had the name of Yisrael. Of course, they say Israel. But, I mean, I'm surprised by how many people don't know that Israel or Yisrael didn't become a nation until they were in Egypt. So what we're saying here is that prior to El revealing this name to Jacob, there was no such thing as the children of Yisrael. Okay? And so these people were formed. And beginning with Jacob, El gave him this blessed or saving name. And we want to talk a little bit about why it's a blessed or a saving name. And what's important as we get to the New Testament, as you notice in black, we said this name was carried by all those that loved him and obeyed all of his commandments. So if you say I'm keeping the Sabbath correctly, if you say I'm keeping Passover, if you say I'm doing everything that El requires me to do, and we know that El has chief shepherds, throughout time, and you were under that chief shepherd. All those people that were under Moses and Joshua, and as we get to the New Testament, Paul and Peter, all those people were Yisrael. So it's important that we understand that and that you be able to explain that to individuals. And some people are so caught up when we talk about Jerusalem. When they hear Israel, they think of a landmass. So they automatically assume that the people over in Jerusalem who live in what's called modern-day Israel are the people of El. But this name, according to the Bible, we see was a divine name. When Jacob wrestled with the angel of El, El placed upon him this particular name. So that's some important information that I think that is crucial, Elder, that people understand.
Well, if I may, just for a minute before you move on, when we talk about this name being given from El, we're saying that prior to El giving the name to Jacob, since this name was given by him, it did not exist among mankind. Right. So this was not in their language until these things happened. Now, the problem is that we're using hindsight. We see that now there is a nation called Israel. Okay, we see certain words in the Hebrew language, but it was not so prior to El giving it. And this is how we know that these names were given from heaven. They're heavenly names, and they belonged to El, and therefore he gave them to his people. So they did not exist until he gave them.
Okay. And, we in Genesis 20, 32nd chapter, Jacob, I'm not going to read it all. We know the story. Jacob wrestled, with the angel of God, and Jacob asked for a blessing. And what did Jacob get? Jacob received the name. So we know that this name is a blessing because Jacob asked for a blessing. He didn't receive gold. He didn't receive cattle. He didn't receive 100 wives or whatever. He received the name. And the name said that as a prince, Jacob, you have power with God and man and has prevailed. So the name, when you know what a prince is, I mean, a prince is under a king. And this gives you power with God and man. It's going to give you prevailing power. So this is a blessed name. And I'm going to come back to this Bible verse when we get to the end to show that it's a saving name as well. And I want you to hold on to that. It's a saving name. Elder El's name remains forever. The Bible makes it clear that the name of Yisrael will remain forever. Therefore, his people that abide by all the commandments will carry this name and remain forever. So you're going to get individuals that say, they won't say Yisrael. They'll say Israel. Those people saying, we talked about that on last week. El did away with those people, or he did away with the name. But the Bible says something altogether different, that this name is going to remain forever. Now, if the name is going to remain forever and the name is attached to people, then common sense should tell you that the people are going to remain forever. So, Elder, let's go through, if you want to, can you see that? Elder, we have some Bible verses. Okay. Yes. Let's go through and read some of these Bible verses that show clearly that the name of Yisrael, when you're talking to people who, of course, you may probably say Israel so that they can understand and relate, the name is going to remain forever. Therefore, the people are going to remain.
Well, if we start in the book of Zephaniah, the 3rd chapter and the 20th verse, it opens by saying, at that time will I bring you again, even in the time that I gather you. And this is a very important verse because it gives us an idea of who he's going to gather. So we're basically talking about his people, Yisrael, and he's going to gather them. And because many people, when they read the New Testament and they talk about the elect that will be gathered, they don't realize who it is, and so they put their own name in there, suggesting that they will be gathered. But the Bible clearly tells us who is elect is in the book of Isaiah, the 43rd chapter, and it lets them know that in the last days that the whole world will be saved, that is, all except for his elect. So this is very important when it comes to dealing with that name. So when he comes back, when he returns, he's going to be able to identify his people by their name. So, for I will make you a name and a praise among all people of the earth. So this hasn't quite come to pass now with the nations that we have here, but this is El's promise that I'm going to make you a name and a praise among all the people of the earth. And so as we continue to teach it, it will come to pass, and people will recognize that we are the people of El. So when I turn back your captivity before your eyes, says Jehovah. So getting back to the idea of this being a special name, Jacob was told that you would have power with El and with man. So this is a name, a prevailing name, because Jacob with it, and Yisrael, and I'm talking about Jacob himself, who was the father of the people of Yisrael, who needed a blessing of this sort more so than they did, being in the land of Egypt, being captives. So, but they were able to come out of Egypt, and they are able to, according to El with his name, to obtain power with El himself and with man. And this is why he didn't have to ask for gold or silver. Right. He asked for a blessing. He got this name, and that name has been a blessing to him and the people of Israel ever since. In the book of 2 Samuel, the 7th chapter, verses 23 through 24, it says, and what one nation, and now it's being very clear because we're really only referring to one nation with this statement, but if you look out among all the nations, what one nation in the earth is like thy people, even like Yisrael. Now, so the Bible clearly tells you who he's talking about. He didn't say even like the Baptist. He didn't say like the Christian, but he indicated the name that belongs to his people. Okay, so that name identifies the people as well as that name itself as being the name of the people who he chose, whom El went to redeem for a people to himself. I don't understand why people continually have to debate over who his chosen are when the Bible clearly tells us that El redeemed his people. He gave them a name and he redeemed them.
Right.
And to make him a name, for thou hast confirmed to thyself thy people Yisrael. Now, who confirmed to themselves? El has confirmed to himself that these are his people. It's confirmed because they have his name, the name that he gave them. And if we're going to be his people at all, we need to be called by the name that he gave for his people. And thou, Yehovah, are become their El. And that's pretty much what the covenant tells you, that if you would keep his commandments and walk upright, that he would be your El and you would be his people. So that includes being called by his name.
Okay. And before we go on, Elder, that's one of those, when I made a statement earlier, that this is a saving name. So throughout the Bible, we look in the Old Testament or we look in the New Testament, when he comes back, and now we're going to get ready to go into this Gentile saved by grace or the spiritual Israel. When he comes back, he's saying that these people that possess my name, now not everybody that possess the name are living right, but an identifying mark for him to gather you is that you're carrying this name. Okay, so when we start talking about the Gentiles or Gentiles saved by grace, the Bible never claimed throughout the Bible that I'm going to save the Gentiles that saved by grace, or I'm going to come and gather spiritual Israel. The Bible said that he gave his people a name, and first thing he's going to look for when he comes back is those people that possess the name. Okay? So we got Isaiah. Go ahead, Elder. Isaiah, the 66th chapter, verse 22.
Well, when we look at the book of Isaiah, it reads, "For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, says the Yehovah." Now, it's clear, and it's very important for us to understand that this is the Yehovah, the Lord, that's saying this. Because the new heaven, which hasn't come yet, and the new earth, which hasn't come yet, is going to remain before him because he's going to make it. But just as they will remain, so shall your seed and your name remain. So, El has never cast away his people. The children of Yisrael, which is the seed of Jacob, they remain. And just like they as a people will remain, so will that name remain, because he's coming back after the people whom he named. We might as well get used to it. We might as well stop acting like we don't know it, because he's coming back after a people without spot or wrinkle. And the Bible names that people Yisrael.
Okay. And then lastly, we have Deuteronomy 26, chapter, verse 19.
Okay. In Deuteronomy, it says, "And to make thee high above all nations." Again, we're referring to El, who makes this claim that basically El is going to make his people Yisrael above all nations. And that's because he has exalted them above every nation. Now, a simple word like above means that there is no equal. If you're above all nations, that means all nations would be below you. Now, that's in the eyes of El. Now, you want to read the mind of El? You want to go around telling what El believes and what he thinks? The Bible is the word of El, and it tells you what he thinks. That his people are high above every nation. Now, which he has made. And we say that he created us all. Well, if he did, he created one group that was his, that is higher than other groups. How are they higher? They are higher in praise and in name. So that name itself is higher than any name that belongs to any other people. And in honor. And that thou mayest be an holy people. So they're high because they are a holy people of El. They belong to him. He made them that way. The Bible tells you in another verse that I formed thee unto the Yehovah thy El. So it doesn't matter what you think. What El thinks is that you're higher in praise, in name, and in honor, and above all other nations, as he has spoken. So when we take these verses into consideration, which many people either don't read or ignore when they read it, and say, oh, those are people of the Old Testament, and that's done away with. Nowhere did the Bible say that, but it said forever. And we know what forever means, so let's stop playing games and let's recognize the truth of the matter.
Okay, good. So these are some clear Bible verses here to show that this name and these people are to remain forever. You got to remember that now before we go into the Gentiles saved by grace, because if you can really establish this part, then you really don't have to go much into the Gentiles saved by grace or spiritual Israel. Obedience with a name. Not only is it a requirement to possess the name, obedience must be accompanied by it. There were many Jews that carried the name Yisrael, but because they were not obedient to all that El commanded, they did not receive the promises. And we talked about this on last week. We always read 2 Chronicles 7:14, and I'll read it relatively quick. We know this Bible verse. We talk about it often. Remember, he said, if my people which are called by my name. So we know that there are people that are called by his name that's not humble, that may not be praying, that may not be seeking his face. And we see there are a lot of Jews in the Bible that had many wicked ways. Okay, so we know that this is a requirement. So the name alone is not sufficient. So, I mean, you have to be prepared. And people say, well, you mean all I need is a name, and that's going to get me to the kingdom? Well, no, there's some other things you have to do. But the point is that the name is a requirement, and it must be accompanied by obedience. Elder, in Mark, the 12th chapter, verse 29, I really like this Bible verse because I think it was the scribes and Pharisees that was talking to Yasha, which is Jesus, and they asked him, what is the greatest commandment of all, or what is the great commandment? And he answered and said, the first of all the commandments is to hear, O Yisrael, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And remember, the second was likened to that, to love thy neighbor. The reason I like this Bible verse, Elder, is because when this is going to help not just on witnessing Yisrael, but when you start talking about the law and people say, well, we don't have to keep the law. All we have to do is love God with all our heart and love our neighbors. But most people, when they read this, they miss the point that's in red. The first of all commandments is what? Some people say the Lord our God is one Lord. No, that's not the first. That's not how it started. The first of all commandments, he said, hear, O Israel, or hear, O Yisrael. So the commandments was only to Yisrael. Okay, so, I mean, that's important to look at from a standpoint of witnessing on the law or witnessing on the name, that it was for Yisrael. And this is New Testament. All right, so not only is the people still remaining in the New Testament, but the law is still remaining as well. Deuteronomy, the 6th chapter, verse 3, it says, hear therefore, O Yisrael, and observe to do it. When you're doing something, that's some work. Okay, you're being obedient to something that you heard, because it says hear. You got to hear it first, and then you have to do it, that it may be well with thee. So if you want things to go well with you, you have to hear and you have to observe to do something. Okay, that it may be well with thee, and that ye may increase mightily, as the Yehovah El of thy fathers has promised thee. So the people that had this name, the people that heard, the people that observed to do it, it's going to go well with them, and things are going to increase mightily, as El had promised. So this is a promise that he gave to us in the land that floweth with milk and honey. And lastly, Psalm, the 81st chapter, verse 8, it says, hear, O my people, and I will testify unto thee O Yisrael, if thou will hearken unto me. Okay? If you listen to me, and if you do what I command you. This is who he's talking to, and this is what he's talking about. So, Elder, we have 4 Bible verses here that shows that the name is not independent of obedience. Okay? So, 2 Chronicles 7:14, Mark 12:29, Deuteronomy 6:3, and Psalm 81:8 shows us that his people that had the name had to be obedient. All right? Didn't say spiritual Israel, didn't say Gentiles. Old Testament and New Testament. All right, Elder, anything before we move on?
Yeah, it seems quite strange to me. Throughout the Old Testament, the Bible has identified his people as Yisrael, which is in English Israel. Even when you go to the New Testament, you hear Peter saying to the children of Israel to listen to what El was saying. But yet we have people who, regardless of what the Old and the New Testament suggest, they suggest that El gave his people other names. And this is not so. And what we need to be able to do is to show them that El never gave those names that you are suggesting are the names that belong to his people. Now, here a problem is that people will find some word in the Bible that sounds good and use it as the name of the people of El, and they're in error. Now, you can't just take a word and use it out of context and use it as a name. And we see that with many groups. We'll see in the Old Testament, they'll see the term Jehovah's Witness, and they'll say that that's what we are, that we are his people, Jehovah's Witness. Well, if you are his witness, you're his witness. But that's not the name that he called you by. We'll see people rushing to grab the name Baptist, saying, I'm Baptist. And the only Baptist you know of is John the Baptist, and he was called that because he baptized. So we cannot go into the Bible and take what sounds good and make a name out of it. You're telling El that you don't accept the name that he gave, and therefore you shouldn't expect to be gathered in the last days, because he's only coming for his people, Yisrael.
Okay. So remember we said the name went with obedience, and we want to talk about being separated from the benefits. We have a few Bible verses coming up that we've read that shows clearly that being disobedient. 2 Chronicles 7:14 was one of the verses that we read to show that you're going to be separated from the benefits of God or the promises of God, okay, if you don't have this name and if you're not being obedient. Okay, Gentiles, I mean, the ones that say they're Gentiles, saved by grace or spiritual Israel, the first thing you have to deal with them is that, God didn't make a promise to Gentiles saved by grace, or he didn't make a promise to spiritual Israel. But having a name, but being disobedient to the law of a nation will cut you off from receiving all of the benefits of that nation. Now, I'm not just talking about Yisrael. I'm talking about any nation. Throughout the Bible, there were many that were called by the name of Yisrael, as we've seen, that did not receive the promises of El due to their disobedience. God stated throughout the Bible that these people that carried the name would be cut off if they didn't comply with the rules that he had set forth for the nation. This is no different than any civilized nation today. There are many consequences for not obeying the laws of the land. Okay, we just have a few Bible verses here showing you in the Old Testament that just because you were called by the name of Yisrael, that didn't give you automatic pass and didn't grant you all the promises of El. In Exodus, the 12th chapter, verse 15, it said, 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread. This was talking about the Passover. Even the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. Okay, now it says, for whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. Now we know that only the children of Israel kept the Passover. So it's saying that you're going to be cut off from the nation. Well, how are you cut off from the nation? We're going to see just in a minute how a person is cut off from a nation. In Leviticus, the 7th chapter, verse 27 says, whatsoever soul it be that eateth any manner of blood, we're talking about a dietary law now, even that soul shall be cut off from his people. So there are a number of places throughout the Bible that talks about you being cut off from the people, cut off from Israel. Elder, before we move on, that term of being cut off from Israel or cut off from his people, how can we define that or make that plain to individuals that we're speaking to?
Well, I like to look at it this way, because there are many promises that El promises people for obedience. When you are disobedient, you cut yourself off from those benefits, from those promises, and you are not entitled to them. So, and this is just one way that we can see this being used, because you cannot benefit from the things that El promised when you don't do the things that he required you to do. So, in that case, we're being cut off. It's the same thing when we look at countries today. If you are a citizen of the United States or whatever country it is that you belong to, and you don't abide by its laws, you're cut off from the benefits that the average citizen can receive.
Right.
For example, you break the law, you go to jail. There are certain things that you just cannot get. Okay? You may still be in that particular country, but certain benefits you won't be able to get because you continually break the law. So the idea is when you're cut off, even if you remain among those people, you won't receive the benefits. Even if you call yourself by that name, you won't receive the benefits. And the Bible makes that very clear. And you were alluding to that in 2 Chronicles, where it opens by saying, if my people, which are called by my name. So just right off the bat, we're seeing that El is identifying who he's talking to. He's talking to his people that have his name and are called by it. So if you're not called by it, he's not talking to you. And, I mean, that's a hard pill to swallow. But the point is let El be true and every man a liar. If he requires you to be called by his name, you need to find yourself being called by his name. Forget that idea of I'm spiritual Yisrael. You can spiritual your way to none of the promises. Because, I mean, he didn't tell you that you're going to be spiritual Yisrael and that you didn't have to keep the commandments. You are required to do the things that he asked you to do in order to receive the blessing. So these are covenants of promise that we're talking about. But the idea is if you're cut off, you cannot benefit. And that's why we're entitling this particular section separated from the benefits. Now, I won't do that now, but we can also go into the book of Ephesians, the 2nd chapter, verses 11 through 13 and 19, and it shows you clearly in the New Testament as well as the Old Testament that for disobedience, you're cut off from the promises.
Okay. And I just have a chart up here or some information over here to the right-hand side. A convicted felon in the U.S., are you still a U.S. citizen? Of course you are. But, you know, you can be separated from the benefits of this country. You can be cut off from some of the benefits in this country. Go get a felony. You lose the right to become an elector, or you cannot vote. It disqualifies you from jury duty for 7 years. I mean, like me, you probably did jury duty anyway, but you can't go to jury duty. You lose the ability to have firearms. If you had a professional license, like a nursing license, or if you were a certified public accountant, you can lose those licenses. And I know individuals who have been evicted. Landlords can evict a tenant who's convicted of a violation. And someone convicted under federal or state law of a crime, especially when it deals with controlled substance in this country, you no longer qualify for financial aid. So these are just 6 examples of things that you can do within the United States if you are a convicted felon, or if you don't, and of course you're a felon because you didn't obey some laws. So these things cut you off from the benefits of this country. So it's not just a biblical concept. Any civilized nation has rules, and if you don't abide by those rules, you're going to be cut off from the benefits that they offer you in that country.
It's all right.
So the promise, every covenant of promise, now, of course, just like the United States, but every covenant of promise that was given from the Father, and this is kind of, Elder said, you know, one of those hard pills to swallow. Every covenant of promise was and still is attached to the name that he gave for his people, Yisrael. Every single covenant, whether you go through the Old Testament, whether you go through the New Testament, you can't find one promise that was for people that wasn't Yisrael. Therefore, when you take on the name and live according to his commandments, these promises follow you. And it should make sense. Now, this name was a divine name. Before El gave it to Jacob, he attached a whole bunch of promises. The greatest promise, I guess if you want to call it the greatest promise that he attached to the name before he gave it to Jacob, that he says, when I come back thousands of years later, I'm coming back for this name that I gave to Jacob. Okay? So he wants, when we talk about being grafted in, this is part of the grafted in process. Elder, let's read, we have two Bible verses here. Go ahead and read Romans, or I can read Romans 9:4, and then we have Ephesians next that you alluded to just a second ago. In the New Testament, for those people who will say, well, God did away with Israel. Israel was disobedient. Paul said, who are the Israelites? To whom pertaineth the adoption. Now, the Israelites, they have the adoption and the glory and the covenants and the giving of the law. You can't even understand the law without getting it from Yisrael. And the service of God. If you want to be serviced by God, you mean to tell me I have to be Yisrael? People don't believe that, but that's what the Bible says. And the promises. So here, you know, we're talking about the New Testament. We're talking about Paul, who was an apostle to the Gentiles. Did Paul say that the promises and the services of God was given to the Gentiles? He sure did not. He said it was given to the Israelites or Yisrael. Okay, New Testament Bible verses makes it perfectly clear. Elder, Ephesians, the 2nd chapter, 11, 12, and 19, we read this. I mean, I don't know how many times we read this Bible verse, but you talked about this on the last slide. Go ahead and let's talk a little bit about this verse.
Well, I want to make sure that we're focused on certain words, and I'll just stop and highlight those words when we get to them. Because the writer here is talking about the same individuals who at one time were Gentiles and who later became part of the commonwealth of Yisrael. Now, if you follow me carefully, you'll see exactly what he's talking about, what the Gentiles are entitled to, as well as what the children of Yisrael are entitled to. So the writer opens by saying, wherefore remember. Now, when you're remembering something, it's something that's already taken place. That ye being in time past Gentiles. So that gives you an idea that you're not Gentiles now, but in the past you were. Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh, made by hands. Now he's going to go into what happened when you were Gentiles. That at that time ye were without Christ. Now this writer is making it very clear that as a Gentile, you don't have Christ. I don't care how much you claim you do. I don't care how much you believe that you do. The writer is making it very clear that you don't. So, at that time, the time when you were Gentiles, ye were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Yisrael. Now, here we're getting a suggestion that perhaps you should be part of the commonwealth of Yisrael. Now, when we think about a commonwealth is, it actually relates to a nation of people, but it's the things that that nation of people, those citizens, have in common. And it refers to the wealth of that nation. All the citizens of that country are supposed to have that wealth or that commonwealth in common. Okay, but because you were a Gentile, you were alien from that commonwealth and strangers from the covenants of promise. So if you're a Gentile saved by grace, guess what? You have no promises.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because the Gentiles don't have Christ. Because they're alienated from the commonwealth. That's what makes them strangers from the covenants of promise. Now it continues because he didn't stop, because there's a lot more that as a Gentile you don't have. Having no hope. Now the Bible clearly tells you that Mashiach, which is Christ, is our hope. But because you don't have Christ, you don't have hope. But it goes further than that. And without God in the world. Now imagine what your life is like when you don't have Christ and you don't have God. This is your predicament as a Gentile. If I were you, I'd stop saying I'm a Gentile saved by grace, because there's no such statement in the Bible as that gives you a name as a people. You're not a Gentile, not if you're living right, or perhaps you are a Gentile because you haven't chosen to live right.
Mm.
Now, let's continue. Verse 19. Now we begin to jump to the present of these same people who used to be Gentiles. Now, therefore, ye are no more strangers and foreigners. Now, something had to happen to cause them not to be strangers and foreigners anymore, but fellow citizens. Well, the only citizenship we referred to was the Commonwealth of Yisrael. So you are fellow citizens with the saints. Why? Because you are called by that name, Yisrael. And guess what? You walk according to his laws. So you are fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of El. Do you believe that you can become part of the household of El by simply being a fellow citizen in the Commonwealth of Yisrael? This is the New Testament, brothers and sisters. We need to believe what the Bible said. Now, you try to run from the Old Testament, say it's done away with, you made a big mistake there because it's not true. But then when you get to the New Testament, you're faced with the same thing.
Right.
What are you going to do? Say the New Testament is wrong? The Bible tells you then that in the future, these people that were Gentiles are now fellow citizens in the Commonwealth of Israel, because that's what we were talking about, with the saints and of the household of El. So you have a choice to make. Do you remain a Gentile? Do you stay in sin? Or do you repent? Do you accept the name and walk according to the laws that El gave his people to walk by? Because if you're fellow citizens, you're entitled to the promise. That's why Jacob received his name in the beginning, so he would have power with El and power with man, and he will prevail.
Okay. So these are two excellent Bible verses, and, you can't deny what Paul, of course people want to try to quote Paul all the time, but I like Romans 9th chapter, what Paul said in Ephesians. I mean, makes it clear, plain as day, these are New Testament Bible verses. So these are your couple of your ace Bible verses here that you can use. So we asked the question, Elder just said, is there such thing as a Gentile saved by grace? I'll reiterate what Elder said. There is not one place in the Bible that describes the Gentiles as one that is saved by grace. Okay. The grace that the Gentiles received was the opportunity to be grafted in with the household of El and receive the promises that belong to Yisrael. Romans 11th chapter, we just read Ephesians the 2nd chapter. This was the grace that they received, the opportunity. If individuals knew what a Gentile was, they would never consider themselves a Gentile. While it is true that a Gentile is defined as a non-Jew, Elder, this is why people say that they're a Gentile, because they said, I'm a non-Jew. The Bible also refers to the Gentiles as heathens. This is proven by the fact that both words fall under the same number of the Hebrew dictionary. And I want to make sure that you clearly understand what I'm saying. If we go to Jeremiah, I believe the second chapter, is it 2 and 10 or 10 and 2? I get those confused. I think this is Jeremiah 2:10. We read this a lot of time. We read it especially around Christmas time. It says, thus saith the Yehovah, learn not the way of the heathens. El has given you a commandment not to learn the ways of the heathens. It says, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathens are dismayed at them. So we have to understand that it's something negative towards the heathen when he says, learn not their ways. In, I think this is Isaiah. I have to go back and look, Psalms or Isaiah. And notice also that I said that these two fall under the same number of the concordance. So in the Hebrew dictionary, you see this 1471. That's found for heathen. It's under 1471 of the Hebrew dictionary. Okay? In the Old Testament as well, this Bible verse says, the lion is come up from the thicket and the destroyer of the Gentiles. So now we're talking about the Gentiles being destroyed. But in the Hebrew, once again, look what we find. 1471. Okay? Is on his way. He is gone forth from his place to make thy land desolate, and thy cities shall be laid waste without an inhabitant. So we can see, Elder, that the word heathen, found under 1471, and the word Gentile, found under 1471, are synonymous. So what is a Gentile? A Gentile is a heathen. Well, you can say, I'm not a heathen. Well, if you call yourself a Gentile, you can try to change the definition and call it a god if you want to. But we're talking about the way the Bible describes it. The way God looks at it is that if you are a Gentile, you are a heathen. Okay? And, you know, Elder, one thing that I looked up, that even if you look, and I went to Webster's Dictionary, and people say, well, I'm not a pagan, I'm not in pagan customs. Well, if you look up the word pagan, here's another definition for it. If you want to get a worldly definition, a pagan is what? The first thing they start off, what did they say? A heathen.
All right.
A pagan is a heathen. Okay, a heathen then is a Gentile. Like my little illustrator here. But so all these words, Elder, are used synonymously. And you can say, I'm not a heathen, I'm not a pagan. Now, if I had the time, I'll go throughout the Christianity religion. And I can confirm this heathen, this Gentile, and this pagan. Because I can show you there's a lot of things within Christianity that has adopted the pagan customs or the Gentile customs. Okay? So this is nothing to be glorified, this Gentile saved by grace. Because you're actually calling yourself a pagan or a heathen. Okay? Elder, anything you can add?
I just want to say this because people will get offended because when you use the word heathen and Gentile together. But, I mean, let's look at some of the doctrine, and I can do this very quick. Many Christians accept the Trinity. And the Trinity states, and most of the Christians that accept it don't even take the time to see what they're accepting. The Trinity states that God is three persons. Now, when have you ever seen three persons be one?
On a horror movie.
Okay? Now, so the idea is even the doctrine that you are passing along is incorrect because there's nowhere in the Bible that says he's three persons. Okay? The Bible does say he's three, but it never says three persons. And we have to actually understand what the Bible says. If you're serving more than one God, polytheistic, that
right.
makes you a Gentile or a heathen. Because that's part of that definition there that we didn't read. If you keep reading it, you'll see it. So you need to understand what it is you're following. Someone put out a doctrine and you accepted it unknowingly in many cases. But we have to believe what the Bible says. And the Bible says that he's one. It told us in the book of Hebrews, and I'm going to leave it alone, it said that the Son was the express image of the person of El. Now, you can say of the persons of El, but of the person of El. So there's only one person. Okay, he may have more than one form, but there's only one person.
Okay.
That's all right.
All right. So I mean that's the definition to say what it says. So God
We didn't write the
acceptance.
definition.
What's that, Evie?
We didn't write the definition, so
No, we didn't write the
as
definition.
the one that wrote it.
So God's acceptance of the Gentiles, it's in the Bible, and people are going to tell you that this is in the Bible. While it is indeed true, salvation was opened up for the Gentiles, you must ask yourself the question, how? Oftentimes people will present ambiguous Bible verses that show that God was the Savior for both Jew and Gentiles. When researching the Bible on any principle, we talk about biblical hermeneutics all the time. You must gather all of the Bible verses pertaining to that subject in order to come up with a correct solution or answer. You learn this in college when you go and do your thesis or your doctorate degree. We always say that if your methodology is off, then your conclusion is going to be incorrect. When doing biblical research, it is necessary to find the concrete Bible verses to go along with what we call ambiguous Bible verses. What makes a Bible verse ambiguous is that when it stands alone or is used in isolation of the concrete Bible verses, it can be interpreted a number of different ways. Recall that both Romans the 11th chapter and Ephesians the 2nd chapter, we call these concrete scriptures. They state that the Gentiles were only grafted or were only granted salvation when they did two things: when they took on the name Yisrael, and when they obeyed all of the laws, statutes, and judgments that were given by El. So we're going to show some ambiguous, what we call ambiguous Bible verses, Elder. And these are verses that people will, if you don't have Ephesians the 2nd chapter locked in your head, or if you don't have Romans the 11th chapter locked in, when people present these Bible verses to you, you're going to be caught with, your pants down, because it says that he was the God of the Jew and the Gentile. Let's look at both of those, some of these Bible verses, Elder. You want to probably take the first two? I guess I can read the last three.
Okay. It opens in 1 Corinthians 7:19, in this particular verse, by saying, circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing, but the keeping of the commandments of El. Now, we know that the Jews were the people of El, but they were called by the name Yisrael. We also know that there are some that were false Jews because they didn't live up to what they were supposed to live up to. And then there's true Jews who were called by the name and they lived up to the particular covenants that El made with his people. But look at this verse. Circumcision, which was performed by the Jews, is nothing. And uncircumcision, which we deal with talking about the Gentile, is nothing. But the Bible is letting you know that the most important thing for you to do is to keep the commandments of El. Because if you keep the commandments, guess what? You're going to be called by his name.
Right.
And if you keep the commandment, you're going to obey all of his laws, and you're going to do what? You're going to be able to receive all the promises of El. So, but the idea is people will look at that and they'll say, see, I don't want to be a Jew. And then I'll say, see, you don't want to be a Gentile. And then people are going to say, well, then I can be what I want to be. So I call myself by some other name. And you are actually messing up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Then we have Romans, the 2nd chapter, verse 9 through 10.
It says, tribulation and anguish upon every soul of man that doeth evil, of the Jew first, and also of the Gentile. But glory, honor, and peace to every man that worketh good, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. Now, if you know to do good, you don't do it. It doesn't matter whether you call yourself a Jew or not. You're going to have the same punishment, and perhaps even greater, because you know to do good. But guess what? So will the Gentile. But if the Jew does righteous, the Jew will be saved. Just like the Gentile, if he converts and does righteousness, he'll be saved. So but the point is, people can take these verses and say, see, I don't have to be a Jew, therefore I don't have to be called by the name Yisrael. You have to learn how to use these verses together, concrete verses as well as those that do not seem as concrete, that are ambiguous, because they can be viewed in more than one way. So when you want to explain the Bible, you explain those ambiguous verses with the concrete verses because they set the standard.
Right. Okay. So we have these last three in Romans, the 9th chapter, verse 24. It says, even us, whom he has called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles.
All right.
So see, he didn't just call the Jew, he called the Gentiles too. But once again, if you don't have those two concrete verses, then you're going to be looking confused. They're going to say, see, well, I got you. In 1 Corinthians 12th chapter, verse 13, it says, for by one Spirit are we all baptized into one body. We're all in the same body, whether we be Jews or Gentiles, whether we be bond or free, and have been all made to drink into one Spirit. Okay? This is another Bible verse that says that we're all together. We're the same. It doesn't matter if you're a Jew or if you're a Gentile.
But if I can say this, look at what the Gentile is doing. The Gentile is doing something. He's not sitting idly. And when you do the works that you're supposed to do, then you will be saved just as any Jew will be.
Okay. And then lastly, we have Romans, the 3rd chapter, verse 29. Is he the God of the Jews only? Is he not also of the Gentiles? Yes, of the Gentiles also. Okay, so if you look at all these Bible verses, they all say that he belongs to the Gentiles as well, or he's the God of the Gentiles. Okay, but in isolation, when if you've ever read the Bible, it says line upon line, precept upon precept. This is what it's talking about. You're combining these concrete Bible verses with these ambiguous, and then you're getting a complete understanding. And
well,
this is how.
That's why John, the 4th chapter, I think it's verse 22, says salvation is of the Jews. So, if salvation is of the Jews, then that means that the Gentile can be saved if they become the way the Jews are and live right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So these are some Bible verses. We only have 2 more slides, so we should be complete in about 5 minutes. But make sure that you write these down, get these Bible verses, and be prepared, because when you talk to anybody, they're going to quote these Bible verses saying that El, opened up salvation for the Gentiles, and he did. But how is the question? Spiritual Israel. Elder, is there such, of course I know your answer, but is there such a thing as this spiritual Israel? I'm spiritual Israel. And people say this, before I let you go, people say this because I'm not born in the land. So I believe that the covenants, I believe that the promises was to Israel. But since I wasn't there, or I'm not from the land, the only thing I can become a spiritual Israel. So, is there such thing?
Well, when we read the Bible, there is no title or a name given to the else people that they're spiritual Israel. People call themselves spiritual Israel because they feel, okay, I wasn't born in the land, I'm not a Jew. And much of what they're listening to is propaganda from many of the Jewish organizations. So they say I'm spiritual Yisrael. But look at what we have in the caption here. It says, many people recognize that all of the covenants of promise were given unto Yisrael, and that those promises stand fast forever. However, they continue to describe themselves as Gentiles saved by grace, or as spiritual Yisrael, even though they were grafted in. Now, they think that because I was grafted in, I'm not a real Jew, or I'm not real Yisrael. But that's not what the Bible says. And let me just sort of give a side verse here. it was in I think it's Romans 2:28-29, where it tells us basically he is not a Jew, which is one inward. In other words, you're not a Jew just because you were born in the land.
Mm-hmm.
You're not a Jew just because your mother was a Jew. And these are all the different reasons that many of the Jews give that say you cannot be a Jew. This is a closed society, and you're out of it. So, but the Bible turns around and says he is a Jew, which is one inwardly. And it talks about whose praise is not of men, but of El. So when you are called by his name, as he suggested, and when you keep all of his commandments, as the Bible suggests, you are a true Jew. Now, when we talk about this, they will tell you over and over, you're not a true Jew. You may be spiritual, but you're not naturalized. But that's not what the Bible says, and we have to learn that. You need to make sure that you're paying attention to this information we're giving to you on Yisrael or becoming Yisrael, and the other particular Bible studies that we have out there, and you can understand exactly what's required to make you naturalized. And you will be able to walk upright according to his commandments and not feel the guilt that I need to be a Jew, but I'm not really one because I wasn't born in the land.
Sure.
So that's the idea. Although the Bible never coined the term spiritual Yisrael. In other words, the Bible really doesn't use that term. People accept this status because the truth has not been revealed unto them. The Bible shows how individuals can become naturalized, even though they suggest that being naturalized is not possible without being born in Jerusalem. So we have to get that out of our head. Just like we got to get out of our head that we are Gentiles saved by grace, get that out of your head, because if you're spiritual Yisrael, that means you're not doing anything, and therefore you will not receive the promises.
Okay, and we have a few Bible studies where we talk about naturalized. How does one become natural Yisrael? And it's possible. There's a couple of Hebrew Israelite organizations in Chicagoland area, Northwest Indiana, and they teach that there are certain people who are natural Israel. But there are other people that come in, and I'll just say it this way. They say, well, there are blacks that are natural Israel, and we'll let, the Caucasians come in, and they Israel, but you spiritual. You can never be natural. Okay, so that's something that people, they teach. Now, Elder, I actually found this, was reading before we started the Bible study. Naturalization. We're talking about in the United States. You're talking about in Canada. You're talking about in France, wherever. Naturalization is the manner in which a person not born in the United States voluntarily becomes a U.S. citizen. Before an individual applies for naturalization, he or she must meet a few requirements. So naturalization doesn't mean that you have to be in a particular land. But there are things that you do to become naturalized or become a part of that nation. That's a concept in many civilized nations, that you can be naturalized, if you will. So this term of naturalization, I mean, if you want to come to, if there's a person in Africa or a person that's in Mexico, and they say, well, I really believe in all the laws of the United States. I really want to come to the United States, and I want to be a citizen. I can't get there, but let me be a spiritual American. I'm going to just go on to the next slide because we kind of talk about that, Elder. But you go ahead, the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to cut that off and let you
finish. Let me just simply say, you're not a spiritual American, so why do you call yourself spiritual Yisrael? These are just things that just don't make sense. Have you ever heard of a foreigner wishing to come to the United States saying, I am spiritual American? Do you think that it's ever possible for the foreigner to receive all the promises of the United States without being called an American? Physically becoming an American? Or abiding by all of its rules? Well, that would be crazy for someone to do that, and I'm sure you really haven't heard that. But why would it be any different when it comes to being called Yisrael and abiding by all the rules that were given by the Father? If you cannot be spiritual American, you cannot be spiritual Yisrael. Face the fact and live up to the laws of that particular country or that particular nation, and you will be the true people of El, true Yisrael.
Okay. So we have to abide. We can't make it any clearer that you have to abide by the rules. And it's a shock because, as you said, Elder, propaganda. People have been saying it. Certain Jews that come from Israel have been saying you can't become a Jew. You've been taught this. You've been taught that the Jews, within Christianity, the Jews killed Christ. The Jews don't believe in all the Bible. I mean, there are so many things that people have been taught for so many years that it's so difficult. I mean, almost nearly impossible that it's going to have to take Yah giving you a divine revelation and giving you wisdom on how to deal with people, because they are deep. I mean, this thing is deep rooted in them. And so to unroot these people, and to, even when you show them in the Bible, you ever show people things in the Bible, it's clear as day. Well, I'm going to just have to pray on it. Or, well, you know, that's the way you worship. And I mean, some people just can't bring themselves to even accepting it, even when you show it to them. Okay? So, I mean, this Bible study was designed to just give you that information. I mean, only thing you can do is take the information and sharpen your sword and be able to go out and use it. You can't make anybody, but you can't make anybody accept it or believe it. But what you can do is do your due diligence and be as thorough and really understand the Bible verses and where they're coming from, and it'll help you to deal. And people will be converted when you really understand these lessons. So we're going to go ahead and open up the lines for any questions, any comments you may have. We went over a lot of things over the last few weeks, so if it's something in regards to what we went over today or last week, go ahead and hit star 6 on your keypad or phone. Elder, anything that you want to add while we were waiting?
Not really. Let me just say this, though. Keep in mind that, because you're definitely going to hear it if you're witnessing the name, that people are going to say that I'm a Gentile saved by grace. You should keep that verse in Ephesians, the 2nd chapter, verses 11 through 13 and 19, and understand it so you can show them that that doesn't make sense. And when they say that they're spiritual Israel, you need to show them that the Bible says that you must be called, and that's in 2 Chronicles 7:14. You must be called by his name, and you must, and look at that if-then clause. You must do certain things in order for him to respond and do certain things for you. And it's just that way. You can't get around it.
Okay. And I like to use, along with Ephesians, I love to use, again, Romans, the 9th chapter, where Paul, who was an apostle to the Gentiles, see, the Gentiles wouldn't receive anything without Paul. And Paul, who was an apostle to them, still confessed that he was a Israelite who got all the promises and the services of God. And so, I think that's a strong Bible verse, Ephesians. And so, I mean, you have enough Bible verses and, some other scriptures and some other items that are not in the Bible that you can use just to talk and make sense out of this thing with people. And El is leaning on you, and he's depending on you because you're his mouthpiece. And so it's really important, Elder, for us to get this information and continue to go over it and become experts in delivering this. So, I think this was a beautiful Bible study the last few weeks on presenting that information that would help them to go out and be effective out there witnessing for Yah. So if you have any questions or any comments, star 6, get ready to close out. We're going to have this Bible study uploaded tonight on our web page, tvbeyth-el.net, so you can go back and look over it in your spare time. If you have any questions, go ahead and send those questions to us at BibleStudy@Beyth-el.net. We'll make sure that we answer those questions and get back with you within 24 hours. If you want to, again, find out get any additional information. If you want to find out more about us, get podcasts, Bible studies, blog talks, you can go ahead and download those on your MP3 player and listen to them in your spare time. Just log on to www.tvbeyth-el.net. So that'll do it for us, Elder. We really enjoyed you. We enjoyed these Bible studies, and we hope that it's beneficial, that it's helping you out in your witnessing. And we're going to continue on next week. Not sure what our topic is going to be over, but we're going to continue on next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Central Time. So on behalf of Elder Avery and myself, we look forward to seeing you this weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday, 8 p.m. sharp.
Shalom.
All right. Shalom.